Sometimes life's most precious gifts come wrapped in tears. On a bitterly cold New Year's Eve, Mark Davidson had exactly $23 left until payday. But that didn't stop him from taking his 8-year-old son Tommy out to see the holiday lights, sharing a thermos of homemade hot chocolate between them. That's when they spotted her, a woman in a designer evening gown, crying alone on a park bench, her mascara creating dark rivers down her cheeks. She had everything money could buy, yet somehow ended up here, in this quiet corner of the city, completely alone. Mark could have walked past, saving his last bit of cocoa for his son. Instead, he made a choice that would change 3 lives forever. Could a simple act of kindness on New Year's Eve turn into something far more magical than midnight fireworks? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Mark Davidson's fingers traced the edge of another past-due notice as he sat at his kitchen table, the harsh yellow light of the overhead bulb casting long shadows across the worn linoleum. The small stack of bills had become a familiar presence, like an unwanted houseguest that refused to leave. He glanced at his watch, 11:43 p.m. In just over 17 minutes, a new year would begin, but the numbers on these papers wouldn't change. The apartment was quiet except for the gentle hum of the aging heater. Tommy's excited chatter from earlier still echoed in his mind, a reminder of why he pushed through each day. His son had barely been able to contain himself when Mark suggested their annual New Year's Eve walk, even though it was just a simple tradition born from necessity rather than luxury. "Dad, can we see the big Christmas tree in the park again?" Tommy had asked that morning, his eyes bright with anticipation. "The one with all the lights?" Mark had looked at his son over their breakfast of slightly burnt toast and powdered eggs. Seeing Sarah's smile in the boy's hopeful expression, 4 years had passed since cancer took her, but sometimes it felt like yesterday. The medical bills had drained their savings, and the insurance settlement had barely covered the funeral costs. But Sarah had made him promise to keep their traditions alive, to make sure Tommy grew up knowing joy despite their circumstances. During the day, Mark worked as a maintenance supervisor at Riverside Elementary, the same school Tommy attended. The job came with decent benefits, but the pay barely covered their basic needs. So every evening, he picked up shifts at Joe's Auto Repair, working on cars until his hands were raw and his back ached. Joe was a good man who paid in cash and never complained when Mark needed to leave early for Tommy's school events. Their apartment wasn't much, a small 2-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor of an aging building in the east side of town. The carpet was worn thin in places, and the kitchen cabinets had seen better days, but Mark had done his best to make it feel like home. Tommy's artwork covered the refrigerator, bright splashes of crayon and marker that brought life to the dated appliance. A string of Christmas lights still hung in the living room window, plugged in only during special occasions to save on electricity. On his son's dresser sat a carefully maintained piggy bank, labeled Tommy's College Fund in wobbly letters. It contained exactly $47.32. Mark had counted it that morning while Tommy was brushing his teeth. The boy didn't know that most of what should have gone into that ceramic pig had instead gone toward keeping the heat on through the winter months. But tonight wasn't about bills or broken dreams. Tonight was about tradition, about showing his son that happiness didn't come with a price tag. Mark had spent the afternoon preparing their special hot, a chocolate, using the last of the cocoa powder and adding a pinch of cinnamon, Sarah's secret ingredient. He'd poured it into their old steel thermos, the one with the slight dent near the bottom, from that camping trip years ago when they'd still been a family of 3. As Mark pulled on his worn wool coat and wrapped Tommy's scarf a little tighter around his son's neck, he pushed aside the weight of financial worry. $23 wasn't much, but it was enough for tonight, enough to let his son see the holiday lights, to share a warm drink under the stars, to welcome a new year with hope instead of despair. "Ready for an adventure, buddy?" Mark asked. watching Tommy hop from foot to foot with barely contained excitement. "Ready!" Tommy beamed, clutching their thermos like it was filled with liquid gold. "This is going to be the best New Year's Eve ever, Dad. I can feel it." Mark smiled, remembering how Sarah used to say the same thing every year. Maybe Tommy was right. Maybe tonight would be different. As they stepped out into the cold December air, neither of them could have known just how prophetic those words would prove to be. Tommy skipped ahead on the salted sidewalk, careful not to let any of the precious hot chocolate splash from the thermos. The streetlights cast long shadows across the fresh snow, and his breath came out in little puffs of white that reminded Mark of Dragon's smoke. At least that's what Tommy called it. Behind them, their apartment building gradually shrank into the darkness, its worn brick facade blending with dozens of others just like it. Earlier that day, while cleaning Tommy's room, Mark had found the journal. It was hidden beneath a stack of comic books, its blue cover adorned with carefully drawn stars and planets. Tommy's college dream book was written across the top in his son's best handwriting. Inside, page after page detailed his 8-year-old's plans for the future. "I want to be an astronomer like Mom always said I could be. I will study the stars and name one after Mom. Dad can come live with me when I'm famous, so he doesn't have to work so hard anymore." The discovery had nearly brought Mark to his knees. Sarah had been the one who first noticed Tommy's fascination with the night sky. She'd spend hours with him on their small balcony, pointing out constellations and sharing stories about the cosmos. Even in her final days at the hospital, she'd made Mark wheel her bed to the window so she could show Tommy the full moon. "Dad, look!" Tommy's voice pulled Mark from his memories. His son was pointing at a group of teenagers throwing snowballs near the park entrance. "Remember last year when we had that huge snowball fight?" Mark nodded, smiling at the memory. "You got me right in the face with that sneak attack." "Mom taught me that move," Tommy said proudly, then his voice softened. "She was really good at snowball fights." "The best," Mark agreed, swallowing the lump in his throat. "She never missed." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, their boots crunching against the fresh snow. The park's main path was lined with trees wrapped in twinkling lights, their branches heavy with winter's burden. Ahead, the Central Plaza's massive Christmas tree towered above them, its thousands of lights reflecting off the surrounding snow, like scattered stars. Tommy had been excelling in school, especially in science and math. His teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, had pulled Mark aside just before the holiday break. "Tommy has a real gift," she'd said, pressing a brochure into his hands. "There's a special science program at the university. They offer scholarships for gifted students starting in middle school. He should apply next year." The brochure was still in his coat pocket, wrinkled from being read and reread. The program could open doors for Tommy, give him opportunities. Mark could never provide on his own, but even with a scholarship, there would be expenses, books, supplies, transportation, the kind of costs that seemed insurmountable when you were counting pennies to keep the lights on. "Can we sit on our bench, Dad?" Tommy asked, pointing to a wooden seat near the giant Christmas tree. They'd claimed it as theirs 3 years ago, right after Sarah passed. It offered the perfect view of both the tree and the city skyline beyond. "Sure, buddy. Time for our traditional New Year's Eve cocoa?" Mark pulled his phone from his pocket. 11:52 p.m. 8 minutes until midnight. Tommy carefully unscrewed the thermos cap, steam rising in delicate spirals into the cold air. "Mom always said hot chocolate tastes better when you share it," he said, pouring some into the cap cup and handing it to his father before taking a sip straight from the thermos. Mark watched his son's face in the glow of the Christmas lights. Tommy had Sarah's eyes, deep brown with flecks of gold that seemed to catch every bit of light. He had her determination too, that quiet strength that made the impossible seem within reach. "Dad," Tommy's voice was thoughtful, "do you think Mom can see the stars better now, since she's up there with them?" The question caught Mark off guard, making his throat tight. "I bet she has the best view in the universe, buddy. Then she can help me study them someday, right? When I become an astronomer?" Mark set down his cup and pulled Tommy close. breathing, in the scent of cocoa and winter air. Your mum's already helping you, Tommy. Every time you look up at the stars, every time you learn something new about space, she's right there with you. Promise I'll get to study them for real someday, like Mom wanted? The weight of that promise settled on Mark's shoulders like a heavy blanket. He thought of the bills piling up at home, of the dwindling balance in their checking account, of all the obstacles standing between Tommy and his dreams. But as he looked into his son's hopeful eyes, he knew he'd move heaven and earth to make it happen. I promise, buddy. We'll find a way. That's when they heard it, a sound that didn't belong among the distant laughter and holiday music. A sob, soft but distinct, coming from somewhere in the shadows beyond their bench. Tommy heard it too, his head turning toward the sound. "Dad?" he whispered, clutching the thermos closer. "I think someone's crying." Mark peered into the darkness, where the Christmas lights didn't quite reach. At first he saw only shadows, but then something moved. A figure seated on one of the park's more secluded benches, shoulders shaking with quiet tears. The sequins on her evening gown caught the distant light, twinkling like fallen stars in the darkness. The woman's designer gown was a stark contrast to the weathered park bench beneath her. Even in the dim light, Mark could see it was the kind of dress that probably cost more than his monthly rent. Its deep blue fabric, dotted with crystals, had gathered dampness from the snow, darkening the hem that pooled around her feet. Her silver heels sat discarded beside her, one tipped onto its side. "Should we see if she's okay?" Tommy whispered, his small hand tugging at Mark's sleeve. The thermos of hot chocolate was still warm in his other hand. Mark hesitated. In New York, you learned early to mind your own business, to walk past others' troubles. But something about the woman's solitude on New Year's Eve made his heart ache. No one should be alone, and crying on a night meant for hope and new beginnings. "Hello?" he called softly, taking a few careful steps forward. "Are you all right, ma'am?" The woman's head snapped up, and she quickly wiped at her face, smearing expensive mascara across her cheeks. "I'm fine," she said automatically, then gave a small, bitter laugh. "Well, that's obviously a lie, isn't it?" As they drew closer, Mark could see she was younger than he'd first thought, probably in her early 30s. Her dark hair was elaborately styled, though now slightly disheveled, and a diamond necklace sparkled at her throat. "I'm Tommy," his son announced, stepping forward with the direct friendliness of childhood. "And this is my dad. We have hot chocolate. Do you want some? Mum always said hot chocolate makes everything better." The woman's face softened at Tommy's words. "Your mom sounds very wise," she said, her voice catching slightly. "I'm Victoria." "Here," Tommy said, already unscrewing the thermos cap. "You can use my dad's cup. He doesn't mind sharing." Mark wanted to apologize for his son's forwardness, but Victoria was already accepting the cup with trembling hands. "Thank you," she whispered, taking a small sip. "Oh, is that cinnamon? Mom's secret recipe," Tommy said proudly. "Dad makes it every New Year's Eve." Victoria looked up at Mark, really seeing him for the first time. Her eyes were a striking shade of green, rimmed red from crying. "It's delicious," she said. "I haven't had homemade hot chocolate since I was about your age, Tommy." Mark found himself settling on the bench beside her, while Tommy perched on his other side. "Rough night?" he asked gently. Victoria stared into the cup of hot chocolate as if it held answers. "You could say that. I just left my own engagement party." She twisted a large diamond ring on her finger. "Or rather, I ran away from it." "Was he mean to you?" Tommy asked with the direct concern of a child. "No, sweetheart, Richard is perfectly nice, perfectly appropriate, perfectly everything my family wants." She took another sip of hot chocolate. "That's the problem, really. It's all so perfect it feels completely wrong." Mark watched as she unconsciously relaxed her rigid posture, her shoulders dropping slightly. "Sometimes perfect on paper doesn't mean perfect in reality," he offered. "Exactly," Victoria's voice cracked. "I'm supposed to be happy. I have everything anyone could want. Money, status, a successful business, a suitable fiancé. but standing there tonight, listening to my father toast to the merger of our family companies, watching Richard smile his practiced smile, I couldn't breathe. I just ran. In the snow? Tommy asked, eyeing her bare feet with concern. Victoria laughed, a real laugh this time. Yes, in the snow. Not my smartest decision. She wiggled her toes, which were turning pink from cold. I must look absolutely crazy. Nah, Mark said, shrugging off his coat. You look like someone who needed to breathe. He draped the coat over her shoulders before she could protest. But you might want to keep warm while you figure things out. I couldn't. Victoria started to object, but Mark shook his head. My mom says it's not crazy to run away from something that feels wrong, Tommy declared wisely. She says it's crazy to run towards something that feels wrong just because other people want you to. Victoria's eyes filled with fresh tears. Your mom is right again, she said softly. When did she get so smart? Mom's in heaven now, Tommy said matter-of-factly. But she still helps us figure things out. He looked up at the stars twinkling above them. She's probably helping you too. Mark watched as Victoria absorbed this information, saw the way her expression shifted from surprise to understanding to something deeper. She looked at their worn clothes, the old thermos, then back at Tommy's earnest face. I'm so sorry about your mom, she said quietly, and thank you, both of you, for sharing your hot chocolate and your kindness with a stranger. I've spent the whole evening surrounded by hundreds of people raising crystal champagne flutes, but this is the first real conversation I've had all night. A distant church bell began to chime, and Tommy jumped up excitedly. Dad, it's almost midnight. We need to make our wishes. Victoria started to stand, gathering Mark's coat to return it. I should go. I've interrupted your tradition. Stay, Mark found himself saying. Please. Tommy's right about the wishes. Everyone needs to make one on New Year's Eve. Yeah, Tommy agreed enthusiastically. You can wish to find the right path instead of the perfect one. That's what Mom would say. Victoria sank back onto the bench, Mark's coat still around her shoulders. In the distance, the first premature fireworks began to streak across the sky, reflecting in the tears that slid down her cheeks. But she was smiling now. 10! Tommy began counting down excitedly. 9, 8. Mark and Victoria joined in, their voices mixing with the scattered shouts from around the park. 7, 6, 5. Tommy grabbed both their hands, forming a small circle. 4, 3, 2, 1. They said together, and the sky exploded into color. The fireworks painted the sky in brilliant bursts of color, reflecting off the fresh snow and Victoria's tear-stained cheeks. Tommy's small hand was still warm in hers, and she found herself holding on, anchored by this child's simple acceptance. Her phone had been buzzing incessantly in her clutch, probably her father, Richard, the party planners, all wondering where the guest of honor had disappeared to. She ignored it. "Make a wish!" Tommy insisted, squeezing both their hands tighter. "Quick, before the first star of the new year fades!" Victoria closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the diamond ring on her finger, the damp silk of her ruined gown, the borrowed warmth of Mark's coat. For the first time that evening, she felt like she could breathe. "I wish," she began. "No!" Tommy's scandalized voice cut her off. "You can't say it out loud. Then it won't come true. That's the rule." "Sorry," Victoria laughed, surprised by how natural it felt. "I'm not very good at wishes or rules, apparently." "That's okay," Tommy said sagely. "Dad says sometimes breaking rules means you're brave, not bad." "Right, Dad?" Mark smiled, and Victoria noticed how the corners of his eyes crinkled. "Context matters, buddy. But yeah, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is listen to your heart instead of the rulebook." Another series of fireworks illuminated the sky, and Victoria shivered despite the coat. Her feet, bare against the snow, had gone nearly numb. "You should come warm up," Tommy announced suddenly. "Our apartment isn't far, and we have more hot chocolate. Plus, you can't walk in the snow with no shoes. Mom would say that's just asking for pneumonia." Mark started to protest, but Victoria surprised herself by saying, "I'd like that, actually, if it's not too much trouble." She watched Mark's internal debate play across his face, consideration for her comfort warring with natural caution. About inviting a stranger home. Finally he nodded. No trouble, but it's nothing fancy, just a warm place to thaw out and figure out your next move. Tommy was already gathering her discarded heels. Dad can make you a map to get home later. He's really good at maps. He even draws pictures on them sometimes. Victoria found herself following them down lamplit paths, Mark's coat sheltering her from the winter wind. Tommy skipped ahead, chattering about constellations and the proper technique for making snow angels. She noticed how Mark kept him in sight at all times, how his shoulders relaxed slightly whenever Tommy looked back to make sure they were following. The walk took less than 10 minutes, but it felt like entering another world. The pristine paths of Central Park gave way to narrower streets lined with modest apartment buildings. Christmas lights hung in windows at odd intervals, some blinking determinedly, others steady in their glow. A cat watched them from behind a first-floor window, its tail twitching as they passed. "We're on the 3rd floor," Tommy informed her. As they approached their building, the elevator's broken again, but Dad says it builds character to take the stairs. "I say a lot of things build character," Mark admitted, holding the door. "It's parent code for, please don't complain about this inconvenience." Victoria found herself smiling again as they climbed the stairs. Her feet had gone from numb to pins and needles, making each step interesting. The stairwell was clean but worn, its walls bearing decades of scuff marks and hastily covered repair jobs. "Here we are," Mark said, fishing keys from his pocket. "Like I said, it's nothing fancy." The apartment door opened to reveal a small but tidy living room. A modest Christmas tree still stood in one corner, its ornaments a clear collection of homemade treasures and carefully preserved heirlooms. A coffee table held several science books, their pages marked with colorful sticky notes. The walls were decorated with framed drawings, clearly Tommy's work, and a few family photos. Victoria's eyes were drawn to one photograph in particular. A woman with Tommy's warm brown eyes smiled at the camera, her arms around a younger Tommy, while Mark looked at them both with unmistakable love. She was wearing scrubs and a badge that read, "Dr. Sarah Davidson, Astronomy Department." "That's Mum," Tommy said, following her gaze. "She was really smart. She studied the stars at the university and taught other people about them too. Want to see my telescope? She gave it to me for Christmas the year before." He trailed off, but quickly brightened. "It's kind of old, but Dad helped me fix it up, and I can see Jupiter's moons with it." "I'd love to see it," Victoria said softly, understanding now why this little boy dreamed of the stars. She slipped off Mark's coat, draping it carefully over a chair. Her evening gown looked absurdly out of place in the modest living room, like a peacock that had wandered into a sparrow's nest. Mark disappeared into the kitchen, and she heard the quiet domestic sounds of cups being gathered, a kettle being filled. Tommy led her to his room, proudly showing her the telescope positioned by his window and the star charts taped carefully to his walls. "Mum made these for me," he explained, pointing to the most detailed chart. "She said everyone needs a map to their dreams." Victoria touched the chart gently, noting the precise calculations written in a steady hand. A physicist who loved the stars, who taught her son to wish on them, who left behind a legacy of wonder and hope. Looking around Tommy's room, at the carefully maintained telescope, the library books about space, the college dream journal peeking out from under his pillow, she understood that Sarah's legacy lived on in every dream her son dreamed. The sound of the kettle whistling drew them back to the kitchen, where Mark was preparing fresh hot chocolate. This time, Victoria watched him add the pinch of cinnamon, noted how he let Tommy stir it exactly 3 times. "For luck, like Mom, and taught me," before pouring it into mismatched mugs. Sitting at their small kitchen table, holding a warm mug with cartoon rockets printed on it, Victoria felt farther from her world of crystal and silver than mere blocks could measure. Yet somehow, she felt more at home than she had all evening. The old radio on the kitchen counter crackled with the sounds of New Year's celebrations across the city. Mark had tuned it to a local station that was broadcasting live from Times Square, the announcer's voice filled with the infectious excitement of the holiday. Victoria sat at the small table, her designer gown pulled around her chair, warming her hands on the rocket-adorned mug. "Can I show her my special box, Dad?" Tommy asked, practically bouncing with enthusiasm. At Mark's nod, he disappeared into his room, returning with a worn shoebox decorated with carefully drawn stars. "This is my memory box," Tommy explained, setting it gently on the table. "Mom and I started it together. We put special things in it that help us remember important stuff." Victoria leaned forward as Tommy began carefully removing items. A small jar of sand, a pressed flower, a smooth river stone, each one clearly precious in its own way. "This is from when we went to the beach," he said, holding up the jar. "Mom was really tired that day, but she still helped me collect the prettiest shells." Mark's hand moved unconsciously to touch the jar, his fingers tracing its lid. Victoria noticed how he watched his son, ready to step in if the memories became too heavy, but letting Tommy share his treasures in his own way. "And this," Tommy continued, pulling out a folded piece of paper, "is the last note Mom wrote me. Want to see?" Before either adult could respond, he carefully unfolded it. The paper was clearly well handled, its creases soft with frequent opening. She put it, "In my lunchbox the day before. She had to stay in the hospital. See? She drew little stars all around the edges." Victoria found herself holding her breath as she looked at the note. The handwriting was shaky but determined. "To my little astronomer. Remember to look up at the stars tonight. I'll be looking at them too, and that means we're never really apart. All my love, Mom." "Dad says it's okay to miss her," Tommy said matter-of-factly, carefully refolding the note. "But it's also okay to be happy and make new friends. Mom would want that." Victoria blinked back tears, touched by the profound wisdom in this child's words. Her own mother had passed away when Victoria was young, but the corporate world of her father had left little room for such tender preservation of memories. Her childhood mementos had been packed away by efficient staff, stored somewhere in their mansion's vast attic. The radio announcer's voice grew more excited as midnight approached in Times Square. Mark stood to adjust the volume, and Victoria noticed how the kitchen light caught the silver threading his dark hair at the temples. He moved with the quiet efficiency of someone used to making a small space work, his movements careful but never cautious. "You know," Victoria found herself saying, "I haven't actually watched the ball drop since I was a kid. Usually I'm at some fancy party, pretending to care about stock portfolios and merger opportunities." "What's a merger?" Tommy asked, carefully, returning items to his memory box. "It's when two companies become one bigger company," Victoria explained. Like when you put two puzzles together to make a bigger picture. "But what if the pieces don't really fit?" Tommy's question was innocent, but it struck at the heart of Victoria's earlier distress. "That's exactly the problem, isn't it?" she said softly, more to herself than to Tommy. "Sometimes people try to force pieces together just because they think they should fit." Mark returned to the table, carrying a plate of slightly misshapen sugar cookies. "Tommy and I made these yesterday," he said, setting them down. "They're not pretty, but they taste okay. Dad let me do the frosting," Tommy announced proudly. "That's why they're a little artistic." Victoria picked up a cookie that might have been attempting to be a star. The frosting was uneven, with a liberal application of silver sprinkles, but the smell of vanilla and butter was warm and inviting. She took a bite and found herself smiling. "It's perfect," she said, and meant it. The radio crackled with the sound of the crowd counting down in Times Square. Tommy quickly distributed more cookies, insisting that eating sweets at midnight was another important tradition. 10 minutes to go," Mark noted, glancing at his watch. "Tommy, why don't you get your wish paper?" "Oh, yeah!" Tommy darted off again, returning with 3 small squares of paper and a handful of colored pencils. "We write down our hopes for the new year," he explained to Victoria. Then we keep them safe until next New Year's Eve to see if they came true. Victoria accepted her paper, suddenly feeling the weight of this simple tradition. When was the last time she'd written down a real hope, not just a business goal or social obligation? In her world, success was measured in quarters and fiscal years, not in wishes and dreams. "Here," Tommy said, pushing the colored pencils toward her. "The purple one's lucky. Mum always used purple." Victoria picked up the purple pencil, its worn surface smooth against her fingers. She watched as Tommy bent over his paper with intense concentration, his tongue sticking out slightly as he wrote. Mark sat quietly with his own paper, his expression thoughtful. The radio played soft holiday music as they wrote, and Victoria found herself looking around this small kitchen with its warm light and mismatched mugs, its walls decorated with school art projects and grocery lists. Everything here was worn, but well-loved, practical but personal. It was so different from her own pristine penthouse with its designer furniture and carefully curated art collection. She looked down at her paper, the purple pencil hovering above it. In the background, the radio announcer reminded listeners that a new year was just minutes away. A new year, she thought, and maybe a new path, one that didn't have to be perfect to be right. Victoria's phone buzzed again in her clutch, the vibration seeming louder in the quiet kitchen. She'd been ignoring it for over an hour now, but this time, Tommy's curiosity got the better of him. "Your phone's been singing a lot," he observed, finishing the last bite of his cookie. "Is it your dad? Sometimes when I don't answer Dad right away, he calls extra times because he worries." She pulled out the phone, its screen lit up with dozens of notifications. Missed calls from her father Richard, her assistant, the event coordinator, text messages ranging from concerned to angry, breaking news alerts about her sudden disappearance from her own engagement party. Hamilton heiress vanishes from plaza. Hotel Gala Victoria. Hamilton's mysterious New Year's Eve disappearance trouble in paradise. Hamilton-Pierce merger in question. Mark's expression changed as he caught sight of the headlines. "Hamilton," he said quietly, "as in Hamilton Industries." Victoria set the phone face down on the table, unable to look at any more messages. Yes, Victoria Hamilton, sole heir to Hamilton Industries, current CEO, and apparently now New York's latest scandal. She tried to keep her voice light, but bitterness crept in. "I'm sure the stock prices are already dropping." "Your family owns that big building downtown, the really shiny one?" Tommy asked, eyes wide. "The one that looks like it's made of mirrors?" "Hamilton Tower," Victoria confirmed. "Among others. My father built the company from nothing, and now it's my job to protect his legacy." She twisted the engagement ring on her finger. "The merger with Pierce Global was supposed to be my crowning achievement, a perfect union of two corporate empires." Her phone buzzed again, and this time she glanced at the message, her father's. Words were terse. "You're embarrassing yourself and this family. The press is having a field day. Come back now, and we can salvage this." "Can I ask you something?" Mark's voice was gentle. "This merger, is it what you want or what everyone expects you to want?" Victoria looked up, meeting his steady gaze. In his eyes she saw no judgment, only genuine concern. It was that simple kindness that broke down her last defenses. "I was groomed for this my entire life," she said, the words spilling out. "Private schools, MBA from Harvard, internships in every department of Hamilton Industries. My father made sure I understood that being a Hamilton meant carrying the weight of thousands of employees' livelihoods. Their families depend on our success." She stood up, pacing the small kitchen. "Richard Pierce is a good match on paper. Our companies complement each other perfectly. The merger would secure jobs, increase market share, please the shareholders. It's the smart move, the responsible move." "But," Mark prompted softly. "But I feel like I'm disappearing," Victoria whispered. "Every day I lose another piece of myself to Victoria Hamilton, CEO, the perfect executive, the perfect fiancée, the perfect heiress. Sometimes I look in the mirror and don't recognize the person looking back." Tommy had been listening intently, his young face serious. "That sounds really lonely," he said simply. Victoria stopped pacing, struck by the child's perception. "It is lonely. Tonight at the party I was surrounded by hundreds of people, but no one asked me how I felt about any of it. They just kept congratulating me on the perfect match, the perfect merger, the perfect life." Her phone lit up again, this time with a message from Richard. "Your father is right. Don't throw away everything we've built. Think of the shareholders." "Not one message asking if I'm okay," Victoria noted with a hollow laugh. "Just concern about the shareholders and the press." Mark stood and picked up her empty mug. As he refilled it with hot chocolate, he spoke carefully. "You know, Sarah used to say that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit that the life you're supposed to want isn't the life you need." "What did she do?" Victoria asked, accepting the fresh mug gratefully. "She turned down a prestigious research position to teach at the university instead," Mark said, smiling at the memory. "Her parents thought she was crazy, but she said she'd rather inspire young minds to love the stars than spend her life alone in an observatory." "Was she happy with that choice?" "The happiest," Tommy chimed in. "She always said her students were like her own constellation of stars, each one shining in their own way." Victoria's phone buzzed again, but this time she didn't even look at it. Instead, she found herself studying the warm kitchen with its cheerful curtains and well-worn counters. She thought about her own massive kitchen in the penthouse, all stainless, steel and marble, used only by her private chef. "When was the last time you cooked something just for fun?" she asked suddenly. "Or went for a walk without a security detail? Or bought something without checking if it fit the Hamilton image?" Mark watched her as understanding dawned on her face. "Sounds like you already know what you need to do," he said quietly. "The question is, are you brave enough to do it?" Victoria looked down at her engagement ring, its massive diamond catching the light. For the first time, she saw it clearly for what it was. Not a symbol of love, but a beautifully crafted cage. Mark's laptop sat open on the coffee table, its screen displaying a breaking news article about Victoria's disappearance. The photo showed her from earlier that evening, radiant in her blue gown, Richard Pierce's arm around her waist as they posed for photographers. The headline beneath read, "Hamilton heiress vanishes, cold feet or corporate crisis." "They make it sound like I'm either a runaway bride or orchestrating a hostile takeover," Victoria said, wrapping her arms around herself. She'd borrowed one of Mark's old sweatshirts to wear over her evening gown, the soft grey fabric providing more comfort than the expensive silk ever had. "The media always wants a simple story," Mark observed, closing the laptop. "But people are more complicated than headlines." Tommy had fallen asleep on the couch, his wish paper clutched in his hand. Victoria watched him breathe softly, struck by how peaceful he looked. "He's an extraordinary child," she said quietly. "You've done an amazing job with him." "Sarah did most of the heavy lifting," Mark replied, gently removing the paper from Tommy's grip and draping a blanket over him. "I'm just trying to keep her wisdom alive." "You're too modest." Victoria moved to the window, watching late-night revelers make their way home through the snowy streets. "I've spent my whole life around people who claim to be extraordinary. Billionaires, politicians, corporate giants. But true extraordinary, that's what I see right here. A father working 2 jobs to keep his son's dreams alive. A little boy who offers hope to crying strangers. That's real wealth." Mark joined her at the window, their reflections ghostly in the glass. "You know, when Sarah got sick, I learned something about wealth. All the overtime in the world couldn't buy more time with her. But every moment we had, we made it count." A group of young people passed below, their laughter floating up through the night air. One of them was taking pictures with their phone, and Victoria instinctively stepped back from the window. "They can't see you up here," Mark assured her. "But we should probably close the curtains just in case." As he drew the curtains, Victoria's phone lit up again. This time it was a news alert with a fresh headline. "Sources claim Hamilton Pierce merger in jeopardy. Stocks expected to plummet at opening bell." "My father will be furious," she murmured. Hamilton Industries stock hasn't dropped in 15 years. He'll see this as me destroying his life's work. Is that what you think you're doing? Victoria sank onto the couch, careful not to wake Tommy. I don't know anymore. The merger makes perfect business sense. Our companies complement each other beautifully. Together, we'd be unstoppable in the market. But I keep thinking about what Tommy said about puzzle pieces that don't fit. Richard and I, we're like two pieces from different puzzles. We look like we should fit, but forcing us together just damages both pieces. Mark sat in the armchair across from her, his expression thoughtful. You know, when Sarah was diagnosed, everyone had opinions about what we should do. Experimental treatments, second mortgages, fundraisers, all logical suggestions. But Sarah, she just wanted to spend her remaining time teaching, showing Tommy the stars and making memories. How did you handle the pressure, the judgment? By remembering that none of those people had to live with our choices. We did. He glanced at Tommy, smiling softly. And every time I see him get excited about astronomy or share his mom's wisdom with others, I know we made the right choice. Victoria's phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Richard. Your father is considering removing you from the board if you don't return immediately. Don't throw away everything we've worked for. Everything we've worked for, Victoria repeated bitterly. As if I haven't spent every day of my adult life working to prove myself worthy of the Hamilton name. Did you know I haven't taken a vacation in 6 years? Haven't had a real friendship since college? Haven't even had time to get a dog? Because it wouldn't fit my schedule. She stood again, too restless to sit. The company is my life. I thought I was okay with that. But sitting here in this warm little apartment with its mismatched mugs and memory boxes, I realize I've been surviving, not living. Mark watched her pace, his silence encouraging her to continue. You want to know something funny? She gave a small, sad laugh. I always dreamed of being a teacher, like your Sarah. I loved the idea of inspiring others, sharing knowledge. But my father said Hamiltons don't teach. We lead, we conquer, we succeed. It's not too late to change paths, Mark said gently. Isn't it? The company employs thousands of people. The merger would secure their jobs, expand their opportunities. How can I put my own happiness above their security? Tommy stirred in his sleep, mumbling something about stars. Victoria's expression softened as she looked at him. You know what's ironic? She said softly. Hamilton Industries has an educational foundation. We fund STEM programs in schools across the country, but it's all numbers to us. Statistics in an annual report. We never see the real impact, never meet the children whose dreams we're helping to build. She paused, a new thought taking shape. We never really connect with the people we claim to serve. Mark nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. Maybe that's where your two paths could meet. Before Victoria could respond, her phone lit, up with a new message. This time it wasn't a text or a news alert, but a photo. Someone at the party had captured the moment she ran out, her face tear-streaked, her gown billowing behind her as she fled into the snow. The caption read, Hamilton heiress's Cinderella moment, but who's her Prince Charming? The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, a modern Cinderella in reverse, finding solace not in a palace, but in a modest apartment where love outweighed luxury and dreams were measured in stars instead of stocks. Victoria stared at her engagement ring for a long moment before slowly sliding it off her finger. It felt heavier in her palm than it had ever felt on her hand. Setting it on the coffee table, she took a deep breath and turned to Mark. I want to help Tommy go to college, she said quietly but firmly. Not just college, any educational opportunity he wants. The science programs, astronomy camps, everything. Mark's expression shifted from surprise to polite resistance. Victoria, that's very generous, but please let me finish. She glanced at Tommy, still sleeping peacefully under the blanket. Hamilton Industries has an educational foundation. Like I mentioned, we fund scholarships, support STEM programs, build computer labs in schools. But it's all just numbers on a spreadsheet to us. Tonight, for the first time, I see the real impact these opportunities could have. She reached for her phone, opened her banking app, and began typing. I'm going to transfer— No. Mark's voice was gentle but firm. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but we can't accept that. Victoria looked up, startled by his refusal. But why not? You've shown me such kindness tonight. Let me do this one thing. Because kindness isn't a transaction, Mark said simply. We didn't help you tonight expecting anything in return. That's not what this was about. Tommy stirred on the couch, mumbling something about stars in his sleep. Victoria watched him for a moment, seeing in his peaceful face all the dreams and potential that reminded her of her own long-buried aspirations. What if, she began slowly, a new idea taking shape, what if it wasn't just about Tommy? What if we could help other children like him? Other families trying to keep their dreams alive? She stood up and began pacing again, her excitement building. The Hamilton Educational Foundation is just a tax write-off right now, a footnote in our corporate responsibility report. But it could be so much more. We could create a program specifically for working parents trying to support their children's education. The Davidson Grant Program. Mark raised an eyebrow. The Davidson Grant Program. Yes, think about it. Your story, your struggle to keep Tommy's dreams alive while working 2 jobs. It's exactly what we should be focusing on. Not just throwing money at schools, but really understanding the challenges families face. She sat down again, leaning forward earnestly. You could help me design it. You understand what these families need in a way that our corporate board never could. We could provide not just financial support, but mentorship, resources, real opportunities. Victoria, Mark said carefully, I think the lack of sleep might be making you a bit impulsive. No, this is the clearest I've thought in years. She grabbed her phone again, but this time, instead of opening her banking app, she opened her notes and began typing rapidly. We could start with a pilot program here in New York. Focus on single parents first, then expand based on what we learn. Include stipends for science camps, educational travel, special programs. She looked up to find Mark watching her with an unreadable expression. What? You really mean this, don't you? This isn't just about tonight or about Tommy. It's about everything. Victoria gestured around the apartment. Tonight, in this home, I've seen what real wealth looks like. It's not about stock prices or merger deals. It's about having the freedom to pursue your dreams, to maintain your integrity, to honor the memory of someone you loved. She paused, gathering her thoughts. The merger with Pierce Global would make us the largest corporate entity in our sector. But what if instead of just acquiring more assets, we focused on creating real change? What if we used our resources to help families like yours keep their dreams alive? And your father, the board, what would they say about this new direction? Victoria's expression hardened with determination. They've always said I needed to prove myself as a leader. Well, maybe it's time I showed them a different kind of leadership, one that measures success, not in quarterly profits, but in lives changed. She stood again, moving to the window and pulling back the curtain slightly. The snow was falling heavier, now coating the city in a fresh blanket of white. I've spent my whole life trying to be the perfect corporate heir. Tonight, running away from my own engagement party, I thought I was having a breakdown. But maybe I was having a breakthrough. Instead, turning back to Mark, she continued, I don't expect you to answer right now. Take time to think about it, but imagine how many families we could help. How many children like Tommy could reach for the stars without their parents having to work themselves to exhaustion? And Richard, the merger? Mark asked quietly. Victoria looked at her engagement ring still sitting on the coffee table. Some puzzles aren't meant to be forced together, she said, echoing Tommy's earlier wisdom. Maybe it's time for Hamilton Industries to build something more meaningful than another corporate empire. The sound of her phone buzzing interrupted the moment. Another news alert. Hamilton Industries, stock futures, plummet as engagement party. Drama unfolds. Victoria picked up her phone, a small smile playing at her lips. You know what? Let it fall. Sometimes you have to tear something down to build it back better. She turned to Mark, her eyes bright with purpose. I'm not asking you to accept charity. I'm asking you to help me change lives, starting with our own. The first light of dawn was just beginning to color the sky when Victoria's phone erupted in a cascade of notifications. The New York Stock Exchange was opening in Asia, and Hamilton Industries shares were already dropping. The financial news networks had caught wind of her disappearance, and speculation was running wild. Hamilton-Pierce merger in doubt. Markets react. Runaway heiress Victoria Hamilton's New Year's vanishing act. Hamilton Industries faces uncertain future as CEO. Goes AWOL. Mark, who had been making fresh coffee, glanced at the headlines over her shoulder. Are you sure you're ready for this? Victoria squared her shoulders, a familiar steel entering her posture. But this time, it wasn't the corporate mask she usually wore. It was something more genuine, more determined. For the first time in my life, yes. Tommy stirred on the couch, blinking sleepily in the early morning light. Did I miss the sunrise? He mumbled, rubbing his eyes. No, buddy, Mark smiled. You're just in time. Victoria watched as Mark helped Tommy fold his blanket, the simple domestic ritual striking a chord deep within her. Her own childhood mornings had been structured affairs with nannies and schedules and protein-optimized breakfasts designed by nutritionists. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from her father's private secretary. Emergency board meeting called for 9 a.m. Your presence is non-negotiable. She took a deep breath, then began typing a response, not to the secretary, but to the Hamilton Industries PR team. It was time to take control of the narrative. I need to make a statement, she announced, looking up from her phone. But not the kind they're expecting. Mark raised an eyebrow. What are you thinking? The truth, or at least the beginning of it. She showed him the draft of her social media post. Last night, I left my engagement party because I realized that the biggest merger Hamilton Industries needs isn't with another corporation. It's with the communities we serve. Stay tuned for an important announcement about the future of the Hamilton Educational Foundation. Sometimes the best business decisions aren't about business at all. Tommy, now fully awake and peering at her phone, grinned. That's like what Mom used to say about her teaching, that the best science wasn't just about science, it was about people. Victoria felt something shift inside her at his words. The market would panic, the board would be furious, and Richard would probably be relieved. Their relationship had always been more about spreadsheets than sparks. Her phone was now ringing non-stop. Each call represented another crack in the carefully constructed facade she'd maintained for years. But as she looked around the small apartment, at the family photos and Tommy's star charts and Mark's quiet strength, she realized that sometimes things needed to break completely before they could be rebuilt into something better. The media's going to be all over this, Mark warned, his protective instincts kicking in. They'll probably find this place soon. Victoria nodded, already thinking ahead. I should go, face the music, deal with the board, start setting things in motion. She paused, then added softly, but I'd like to come back if that's okay, to talk more about the foundation, about how we can really make a difference. What about your father? The shareholders? Mark asked. They'll adapt or they won't. But I'm done letting fear of their reactions control my life. She stood, smoothing her rumpled gown. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit that the life you're supposed to want isn't the life you need, right? Mark smiled, recognizing Sarah's words. Right. Tommy suddenly darted to his room, returning with something clutched in his hand. Here, he said, holding out his purple pencil, the lucky one he'd used for his wish. For your meeting. Mom always said sometimes you need a little extra luck to be brave. Victoria took the pencil, her vision blurring slightly. In her world of Mont Blanc pens and digital signatures, this worn pencil felt more valuable than any luxury writing instrument she'd ever owned. As Victoria prepared to leave, her designer gown now wrinkled and her makeup long faded, Mark handed her a carefully folded piece of paper. "Directions back to your world," he said with a gentle smile, "though something tells me you might need directions back here more." She unfolded the paper to find not just a map, but a small sketch of their apartment building with stars drawn around it. Tommy's contribution, no doubt. In the corner, Mark had written his phone number. "For when you're ready to talk about the foundation," he explained. "No pressure, no expectations, just don't let them make you forget what you felt here tonight." The first hints of sunrise were painting the sky in delicate pinks and golds when Victoria's car service pulled up outside. She'd finally answered one of her assistant's calls, giving only the cross streets and a request for discretion. The sleek black car looked almost alien against the modest streetscape, like a cosmic anomaly in Tommy's beloved night sky. Before she could leave, Tommy pressed something else into her hands, 2 tickets to the Natural History Museum's upcoming Celestial exhibition. "Dad got them for my birthday," he explained. "But maybe you could come with us? They're going to have a whole section about undiscovered stars." Victoria held the tickets carefully, understanding the weight of the invitation. These weren't just museum tickets, they were an offering of friendship, pure and uncomplicated by corporate politics or social obligations. "I'd love to," she said, softly, then looked at Mark. "That is, if it's okay." He nodded, understanding passing between them. "Just let us know when the dust settles." Her phone buzzed again, another message from the board. But this time there was also a news alert that made her blood run cold. "Pierce Global announces emergency press conference. Merger implications to be discussed." Richard was making his move, trying to seize control of the narrative. She could almost hear her father's voice. "This is business, Victoria, nothing personal." But that was the problem, wasn't it? It had always been business. Every decision, every relationship, every moment of her life had been weighed against its corporate value. Standing here, holding children's museum tickets and a lucky purple pencil, she finally understood how much that had cost her. "Sometimes," Tommy said suddenly, as if reading her thoughts, "Mom would say that the hardest math problem is adding up what really matters." Victoria knelt down to his level, her expensive gown pooling around her on the worn carpet. "Your mom was very wise. Tommy, I wish I could have met her." "She would have liked you," he said with absolute certainty, "especially now that you're being brave." The car horn sounded softly outside, a gentle reminder that her other world was waiting. Victoria stood, squaring her shoulders. In one hand, she held her phone with its countless messages and market alerts. In the other, she clutched the museum tickets and purple pencil. "The foundation," she said to Mark, her voice firm. "I meant what I said. This isn't just a whim or a crisis of conscience. When I walk into that board meeting, I'm going to fight for something real, something that matters." Mark watched her thoughtfully. "You know they won't make it easy." "No," she agreed. "But maybe that's how I'll know it's right." She glanced down at Tommy. "After all, the best stars are the ones you have to look hardest to find, aren't they?" His face lit up at her use of astronomy as metaphor. "And sometimes," he added excitedly, "the ones that look smallest from Earth turn out to be the biggest and brightest when you get a closer look." Victoria felt something settle in her chest. Certainty, perhaps, or courage. Or maybe just the weight of finally choosing her own path. The car horn sounded again, and she knew it was time to face whatever came next. The Hamilton Industries boardroom hadn't changed since Victoria was a child. The same mahogany table dominated the space, its polished surface reflecting the Manhattan skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. She'd spent countless hours here, first sitting quietly beside her father as he conducted meetings, then later leading those meetings herself. But today, Something felt different. Perhaps it was her, still wearing last night's wrinkled gown, her father's Mont Blanc pen replaced by Tommy's purple pencil. "The board is waiting," her assistant whispered, hovering anxiously at her elbow. "Your father arrived 10 minutes ago, and Mr. Pierce is here too," Victoria finished, unsurprised. Of course Richard would come. This wasn't just about their engagement anymore. It was about power, control, and billions in shareholder value. She glanced at her phone one last time before entering. Mark had sent a simple message: "Remember why you're doing this." Below it was a photo of Tommy's star chart, its careful annotations and hopeful calculations, a reminder of what really mattered. The boardroom fell silent as she entered. 12 pairs of eyes watched her cross the room, each gaze carrying its own mixture of judgment, curiosity, and calculation. Her father sat at the head of the table, his face a mask of controlled disappointment. Richard stood by the windows, impeccably dressed despite the early hour, his expression blandly pleasant as always. "Victoria," her father began, his voice carrying that particular tone of paternal disapproval she'd known since childhood. "I trust you're ready to explain your theatrical exit last night?" She took her seat, not her usual place at her father's right hand, but instead at the middle of the table. From here, she could see everyone clearly. "Actually, yes, I am." She placed her laptop on the table, ignored the raised eyebrows at her disheveled appearance, and opened the presentation she'd prepared in the car. The first slide appeared on the boardroom screens: the Hamilton Foundation, a new direction. "Victoria," Richard interrupted smoothly, "perhaps we should first address the more pressing matter of the merger." She met his gaze steadily. "That's exactly what I'm addressing, Richard. Just not in the way you expect." She advanced to the next slide, showing the Foundation's current statistics. Money spent, programs funded, tax benefits received. "For years, we've treated our educational foundation as a corporate responsibility checkbox, a way to offset taxes and generate positive press. But what if it could be more?" "The foundation is not a priority right now," her father cut in. The merger is exactly why this matters." Victoria stood, drawing on every lesson in corporate presence she'd ever learned. "We're so focused on combining our companies that we've forgotten why we built them in the first place. Dad, you started Hamilton Industries to create something meaningful, remember? To build things that would last." She clicked to the next slide, a mock-up of the Davidson grant program she'd sketched out in the car. "What if instead of just acquiring Pierce Global, we revolutionized how corporate philanthropy works? What if we created something that actually changes lives?" The board members exchanged glances. Victoria could read their thoughts. She'd lost her mind, had a breakdown, gone soft. But she pressed on, Tommy's purple pencil held firmly in her hand. "Last night I met a family that showed me what real investment looks like. A single father working 2 jobs to keep his son's dreams of becoming an astronomer alive. That boy has more passion for science than half the tech startups we've acquired this year, but without support, without opportunity." "This is business, Victoria," Richard said, his voice carrying just a hint of condescension, "not a charity case." "No," she agreed, meeting his eyes. "It's bigger than that. It's our legacy. What do we want Hamilton Industries to be remembered for? Another merger? Another market consolidation, or for creating real, lasting change in people's lives?" Victoria's father rose from his chair, his movement deliberate and controlled. She recognized this tactic. He'd used it countless times in negotiations, the slow stand that commanded attention and implied authority. "You're talking about dismantling a merger worth billions," he said, each word measured, "to focus on charity work. Do you have any idea how that sounds?" Victoria twisted, Tommy's purple pencil in her fingers, drawing strength from its worn surface. "I'm talking about evolution, Dad, about growth, about making Hamilton Industries more than just another corporate giant." "More?" Richard scoffed from his position by the window. We would be the largest combined entity in our sector, the market. Share alone. The market share won't matter if we lose our soul in the process, Victoria interrupted. She pulled up a new slide, a photo of Hamilton Industries' first building, the modest office where her father had started everything. Dad, remember what you told me about this place? About why you chose education technology as our first venture. Her father's expression flickered, the smallest crack in his corporate mask. That was different. Times were different, were they? You said you wanted to democratize education, to give every child the tools they needed to succeed. She advanced. To the next slide, children using Hamilton educational software in schools across the country. We did that. But somewhere along the way, we stopped seeing the children and started seeing only the profit margins. The shareholders, Richard began, but Victoria cut him off. We'll respect bold vision backed by solid planning. She clicked through more. Slides, financial projections, market analysis, social impact studies. I spent the morning having our analysts run the numbers. An expanded foundation, properly structured and executed, could actually increase our market value. Social impact. Investment is growing exponentially. We could be leaders in this space. The board members were leaning forward now, their expressions shifting from dismissal to consideration. Victoria pressed her advantage. The Davidson Grant Program would be just the beginning. Imagine a complete reimagining of corporate philanthropy. Real investment in communities, in futures, not just tax write-offs, but genuine impact. Davidson. Her father's voice was sharp. Who are the Davidsons? Victoria straightened, holding his gaze. The family that reminded me what real wealth looks like. A father working 2 jobs to support his son's dreams of becoming an astronomer, the kind of dreams our company was founded to support. She saw the moment her father understood, about where she'd been, about why she'd run. His face hardened. You spent the night with strangers. Do you have any idea what could have happened? What this could do to our reputation? What happened was, I remembered who I am, who we're supposed to be. Victoria's voice was firm. We're not just profit margins and market shares. We're not just mergers and acquisitions. We're supposed to be builders, creators, supporters of dreams. Richard moved then, smooth and practiced, to stand beside her father. The perfect corporate alliance, just as they'd planned. Victoria, darling, you're tired, overwhelmed. Why don't we take a break? Postpone this discussion. No. Victoria's voice cut through the boardroom like a blade. No more postponing. No more pretending. This merger isn't about growth or innovation. It's about power, about control. And I won't sacrifice what Hamilton Industries could be just to gain more of either. She turned to face the board directly. I'm not asking for permission. As CEO, I'm announcing a new direction for this company. The merger is off. The foundation will be expanded. And if anyone doesn't like it, she smiled, a genuine smile that felt foreign in this room of corporate politics. Well, I believe my controlling shares give me the final say. The silence that followed was deafening. Her father's face had gone pale. Richard's bland smile had finally cracked. And the board members were exchanging rapid glances, recalculating allegiances and opportunities in real time. Victoria gathered her things, her laptop, her wrinkled notes, and most importantly, Tommy's purple pencil. The official announcement will go out this afternoon. I suggest you all take some time to consider whether you want to be part of what comes next. As she reached the door, her father's voice stopped her. Victoria. She turned to face him one last time. Your mother would be disappointed. She felt the words like a physical blow, but kept her spine straight. No, Dad. Mom would be proud. She always said wealth without purpose was poverty in disguise. She met his eyes, saw the surprise there. He'd forgotten those words of her mother's. But she never had. I'm choosing purpose. I hope you'll understand that someday. 1 month later, Victoria stood in the renovated Hamilton Foundation offices, watching as workers installed the new sign, the Davidson Initiative for Educational Excellence. The morning sun caught the letters, making them gleam against the wall's warm wood tones. Mark stood beside her, looking slightly uncomfortable in his new business casual attire. As the program's first director, he'd insisted on maintaining his connection to the school maintenance work, to keep us grounded. In reality, as he put it, the board had surprisingly agreed, recognizing the value of his practical experience. "Still feels a bit surreal," he admitted, watching the installation. "A month ago, I was fixing bathroom sinks. Now I'm helping design educational support programs for working families." Victoria smiled, remembering the market's unexpected reaction to her announcement. While Hamilton Industries' stock had initially plunged, it had rebounded dramatically when the full scope of the foundation's new direction was revealed. Social impact investors had flocked to support the initiative, and applications for the first round of grants were already flooding in. "Tommy's application is on my desk," she said softly. "First one we received, though of course he'll go through the same review process as everyone else." Mark nodded, understanding and appreciating the importance of fairness. He wouldn't want it any other way. Sarah taught him that earned achievements mean more than given ones. Through the office windows, they could see the city stretching out before them, full of families and dreams waiting to be discovered. Victoria touched the purple pencil, now permanently stationed on her desk, a reminder of the night that had changed everything. The following New Year's Eve found Victoria sitting on a familiar park bench, this time wearing comfortable boots and a warm wool coat. The same Christmas tree towered above, its lights twinkling against the dark sky, but everything else had changed. Tommy bounded up, clutching his latest astronomy project, a detailed study of Jupiter's moons that had earned him top honors in the city's science fair. The Davidson Initiative had helped fund his participation, along with dozens of other promising students from working families. "Look what Dad and I brought." He held up a thermos, identical to the one from a year ago. "Hot chocolate with cinnamon. Mum's recipe." Mark followed close behind, carrying an extra cup. "Thought we might need this tonight," he said, his eyes meeting Victoria's with warm familiarity. Over the past year, their professional partnership had blossomed into something deeper, built on shared values and understanding. Victoria accepted the cup, breathing in the familiar scent of cinnamon and chocolate. Perfect timing. The first stars are just coming out. The new community center rose from what had once been an abandoned warehouse, its modern design incorporating walls of windows that reflected the spring sunshine. Above the entrance, the words Sarah Davidson Center for Science and Discovery gleamed in silver letters. Inside, children from across the city gathered to learn, dream, and explore. Victoria walked through the bustling halls, watching young astronomers peer through telescopes in the observation dome, future engineers tinkering with robotics kits, and aspiring scientists conducting their first experiments. Each space had been carefully designed to nurture curiosity and encourage discovery. In the main atrium, a wall of screens displayed live updates from Davidson Initiative programs across the country. The foundation had expanded beyond New York, establishing similar centers in cities nationwide, each one focused on supporting working families, ensuring that parents' financial circumstances wouldn't limit their children's potential. Mark's office door was open, as always. Inside, he was meeting with a single mother who worked nights as a nurse while pursuing her own dream of becoming a science teacher. The initiative's adult education program would help fund her studies, while providing childcare for her daughters. Victoria paused, listening as Mark shared Sarah's wisdom about balancing dreams and responsibilities. Tommy, now 9, had become the center's unofficial junior ambassador. He could often be found helping younger children with their first look through a telescope or explaining basic astronomy concepts with infectious enthusiasm. His own academic achievements had grown remarkably, not just because of the initiative's support, but because he no longer had to worry about the cost of his dreams burdening his father. Victoria's father had finally visited the center last week, He'd walked the halls in silence, watching children learn and grow. In the robotics lab, he'd paused to help a young girl adjust her prototype, and Victoria had seen a flash of the man who'd once dreamed of democratizing education. Before leaving, he'd quietly authorized an additional funding package for expanding the program. The initiative had transformed Hamilton Industries as well. The company's focus on meaningful social impact had attracted a new generation of innovative employees and partners. Their stock value had steadily climbed as more investors recognized the long-term benefits of investing in education and community development. But the real measure of success wasn't in stock prices or corporate rankings. It was in the stories that filled these halls. The single dad who could now afford to send his daughter to space camp. The grandmother raising her grandchildren who found support and resources here. The teenagers who no longer had to choose between part-time jobs and academic opportunities. Victoria stopped at a window overlooking the center's garden, where students tended plants as part of their biology studies. A year ago, she'd been trapped in a life that looked perfect on paper, but felt empty inside. Now, watching a young girl carefully measure the growth of her sunflower plant, while her working mother attended a career development workshop down the hall, Victoria understood what real success looked like. The center had become more than just a building or a program. It was a living testament to Sarah's belief that everyone deserved a chance to reach for the stars. It was proof that one act of kindness on a snowy New Year's Eve could grow into something that changed countless lives. And it was a reminder that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose purpose over perfection. The rooftop garden of the Sarah Davidson Center offered a perfect view of the sunset. Victoria stood at the railing, watching the sky paint itself in shades of pink and gold that reminded her of that first New Year's dawn. She'd traded her corporate suits for more comfortable attire these days, though she still kept Tommy's purple. Pencil on her desk, now worn down to a stub, but no less precious. Mark joined her at the railing, his presence as steady and comforting as it had been that first night. "Tommy's showing the new kids how to use the telescopes," he said, smiling. He told them all about his mom being a star now, watching over. Young scientists. Victoria's hand found his, their fingers intertwining naturally. Sarah would be proud of him, of both of you. She would have loved all of this, Mark said softly. Especially you. She always said the best teachers are the ones who never stop learning themselves. Victoria thought about everything she'd learned in the past year, about purpose, about courage, about love that grew quietly and surely, like stars emerging in the evening sky. She thought about the night she'd run away from what seemed perfect, only to find what was real. "I have something for you," Mark said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small, worn notebook. "Tommy and I found it last week, going through some of Sarah's old things. We think you should have it." Victoria opened the notebook carefully. Inside, in Sarah's handwriting, were notes about her students, her hopes for astronomy education, her dreams of making science accessible to everyone. On the last page, she'd written, "Remember, the brightest stars aren't always the ones that shine the longest, but the ones that help others find their light." Tears blurred Victoria's vision as Mark knelt beside her, holding not a diamond ring, but a simple band with a small star engraved on its surface. "Sarah taught me that love isn't about perfection," he said quietly. "It's about finding someone who helps you shine brighter." On New Year's Eve, exactly 1 year after their first meeting, 3 figures approached the familiar park bench. Victoria carried a brand-new thermos set, a wedding gift from her father, who had finally understood that his daughter had found something more valuable than any merger. Tommy ran ahead to their spot beneath the giant Christmas tree, already pointing out constellations to other children who had gathered for the holiday celebration. He wore a junior astronomer's badge from the Sarah Davidson Center, earned through his own merit and hard work. Mark and Victoria settled on the bench where they had first shared hot chocolate with a crying stranger in a designer gown. Now, Victoria's Simple wedding ring caught the light of the Christmas decorations, its tiny star twinkling like a private constellation. "Look!" Tommy called out, his voice carrying the same excitement it had held a year ago. "The first star. Time to make our wishes." As the park filled with holiday revelers and the sound of distant carols, the three of them held hands, their faces turned upward to the emerging stars. Above them, somewhere in the vast expanse of space, they knew Sarah was watching, her legacy living on in every dream they helped come true.